the economic causes of sectionalism. So, congratulations on making it this far. Now, we are going to talk about the issues of the causes of the Civil War, because ultimately we are in the antebellum period, as we discussed in class. Ante meaning before, bellum meaning war. This is the before war period, the pre-war period, if you will, before the Civil War. We all know it's coming. We all know how it starts. But the question has always been, what exactly do we describe as the root cause of this war? And chances are you may even be left with a few questions, if your education was anything like mine, about, well, what exactly do I determine as the main or primary or real, quote-unquote, cause of the war? So let's discuss a little bit of this and what I mean by the real cause of the war. So, what is sectionalism? Well, it refers to the intense divide of economic interests, values, and ways of life between two regions of the same country. So why does this matter? Well, thinking about the Civil War. Now, your discussion of the Civil War has probably occurred something akin to this. When you were in elementary school, you were probably taught when you were in about first grade that the Civil War was fought over slavery. It was presented as a moral struggle between the very ethical, freedom-centric North and a rather dark or evil, slavery-loving, racist South. And that was probably the way the conversation went when you were in about first grade, which makes sense. That's kind of how you'd want to think about it as a first grader. Now, when you were in middle school, your 8th grade teacher probably bopped you over the head with this weird sort of revelation that the Civil War was fought over sectionalism and talked a lot about economics and tariffs. If your 8th grade teacher didn't do this, don't worry, it's not that big of a deal. Because by the time you get to high school and college, we're going to be back to talking about the Civil War, mostly from the standpoint of race and slavery. So if you didn't get the sectionalism bop on the head, don't even worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. I'm just going to make you aware of this vocab word because it will come up from time to time. But I digress. So now that you're reaching high school, what's the final version on this Civil War business? And the answer is it's kind of complicated. And it's complicated for one very important reason. Sectionalism and slavery are incredibly tightly intertwined. And the reason for this is that slavery is the root cause of sectionalism. Why? Well, if we think about the Southern economy, as we talked about previously in our colonial unit, is predicated on forced labor and a cash crop economy, right? That's what it is. It's based upon trying to grow certain non-edible foodstuffs, or mostly non-edible foodstuffs, agrarian products, and selling them on the international market. And the best way to maximize profit while doing this is to have a non-paid labor force. Originally, this is indentured servants, and when those become scarce, it moves into slavery and stays with slavery up until the abolition of slavery. Now, slavery, however, was introduced into the South in order to enable this cash crop economy. So we arrive at this odd sort of chicken and the egg kind of business going on with sectionalism and slavery. Is it an issue of slavery is the cause of sectionalism because slavery makes this cash crop economy profitable, and thus and that's the origin? Or is it rather that a desire originally by the colonial governments of England and Holland to introduce this kind of plantation system to grow these much desired cash crops led to the origin of slavery in the American colonies? However you slice it, these two are tightly intertwined. Without slavery, you would not have the same profitability in an agrarian lifestyle, which ultimately would not make the South separate from the North. However, without that essential focus on an agrarian world view instead of an industrialized world view, the South would not have been as adamant about the maintenance of slavery. I'm hoping this isn't too confusing, or I haven't lost you somewhere in any of this. Just suffice it to say the two are very interconnected. So ultimately, slavery is the root cause of sectionalism, or that's probably the easiest way to understand it. But it's important to understand basically that sectionalism would not have existed without slavery. By the very way, slavery is the independent factor, whereas sectionalism is the conditional factor. So the Southern economy. So what is it like? Well, the Southern economy is agrarian. It is a farm-based economy. The South never really industrialized before the Civil War. I'm going to say this one more time. The South did not really industrialize before the Civil War. This is going to have major impacts when we talk about the Civil War. So what is the main economy there? It is cash crops, mostly grown on plantations, on these large farms. And they were designed mostly for export abroad. And in return, manufactured goods would be imported. So most of these southern states are simply shipping out tobacco, indigo, rice, or cotton, or some combination of them. And those are being sold either abroad to England and France, or else are being sold up to the states up north. And in return, any and all manufactured goods that the South requires are being shipped down to them. So, let's talk about the rise of King Cotton. Well, so one of the things we talked about a little bit last time we talked about the South, we're going to talk about it again, is that there are two types of cotton that exist in the American South. What are called long staple and short staple. Now, long staple has these long, wispy strands that are, and very few seeds. It's very easy. You could pretty much just take a hand brush and brush the few seeds that are in the cotton out of it, and you have all these nice fibers. You can then put those fibers through a spinning wheel, produce thread, and then use that thread to be woven into cloth, which can ultimately be used to make clothing. At the other end of the stick, however, this long staple cotton only grew on a select few islands off the coast of the Carolinas. What you found growing in most of the South is what's called short staple cotton. Now, short staple cotton is a much tighter wound ball of fibers with more seeds in it. And in order to extract this by hand was a long and grueling process that simply put took more time and effort than it was worth monetarily to be profitable. So much of the South really didn't focus on cotton. In fact, even though nowadays we think of the cotton as the sort of the quintessential Southern plantation crop, during most of the South's colonial history, or the entirety of its colonial history, the main crops in question were tobacco, rice, and indigo. So now along comes a gentleman by the name of Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney invents a simple machine called the cotton gin, and it's a crank-operated cylinder with fine metal teeth. And you can see a diagram of it up in the right-hand corner of the screen. It basically had a small hopper or elevated slope in which cotton balls with seeds go down. They would go down towards a sort of screen with teeth, and there'd be as you turned the crank, it would brush out the brushes would brush out these and comb out these seeds, which would then be deposited elsewhere, leaving cleaned cotton fibers ready for the loom, ready for the weaving. Now, at this point, this could separate the seeds from the short staple cotton, and it suddenly became intensely profitable. Why? Well, basically, one thing that happened was in the old system, if you did want to grow short staple cotton, it required teams upon teams of men to literally just stand around brushing the cotton plants, basically, is what was required to brush the seeds out. And it just wasn't profitable. Suddenly, only a couple of people were really needed to operate a cotton gin, and the rest of your labor force could be out in the fields. You could suddenly also plant more cotton because you knew that it could all be processed. Now, this particularly benefited large plantation owners. And the reason for this is that, one, they had the land and the large labor force required to grow large amounts of cotton plants. And they were able to use what's called economies of scale. So what economies of scale are refers to a system where the more of a product you produce, the less marginal cost is incurred by each additional product, each additional amount of the product that you bring into production. In short, it's cheaper to produce one unit when you produce them in bulk. And large planters had the potential to really play off this system. So, what is the cause? Well, slavery gets invigorated. The cotton crissy, as they're sometimes called, the wealthiest plantation owners, often owning hundreds of slaves, tended to displace many of the small farmers who could not compete. Why? Well, what happens with economy of scale is as you produce more, the cost per unit goes down. So where a bundle of cotton might have cost, say, 10 cents a bundle, maybe before the cotton gin, now goes down to maybe 1 cent a bundle. Now, for the cotton crusade, this is no big deal because they produce so much of it, they're still making a lot of money. But for smaller farmers who can't produce as many bundles, it breaks them, and they end up getting out of business. So, not only do you have more power and wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but now, what do these small farmers do? Well, a lot of them enter what's the unsavory business of slave breeding and slave breaking. Slave breeding is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It is a rather unsavory process of them trying to acquire slaves, for those slaves having children they can then sell. That's the most G-rated way I can put that. Slave breaking is basically the process whereby an individual would be used to try and break the will of a slave who was not as compliant as desired. Pretty much, if you ever were curious what jobs in history allowed you to pretty much just beat people, this was one of them. Now, cotton exports. Now, the exported cotton was valued both for Northern and British industrial use. So what they would do is they would take these goods, they would take the cotton, raw cotton they produced, and they would ship it, or cotton fibers, up north or to British factories. Now remember, both the North and the British are really producing textiles mostly at this phase of industrialization, so they need this raw product to be spun into thread and woven into cloth. So it's big business, and the South can then use this exported cotton to really bring in any goods it wants. So what is the North doing while it's happening? Well, beginning in Massachusetts, the northeastern United States begins industrializing. Water mills based on the blueprints smuggled out of Britain. Actually, no, it was illegal to smuggle factory plans out of Britain at the time, but some gentlemen did it, and beginning at this point, the North begins industrializing. Now, slavery had not really been significant in the North, and it soon disappeared during industrialization. The North, remember, before this had mostly been subsistence agriculture or merchant work, careers that really didn't benefit much from slave labor. And so as a result, yes, there were a few slaveholders here and there, but they never owned as many slaves as the large cotton crusade down south, and it wasn't as vital to their income. So as a result of it, in the North, you'd have some people who would have slaves who would basically act as, household servants or a few extra field hands, but it wasn't like in the South where your economy was predicated on a system where teams of slaves worked the fields day in and day out. So as a result of this, it was much easier for the North to begin phasing out slavery as industrialization grew. Now, the rather unsavory part is that in the North, the simple other reality was that it was easier to take advantage of free labor because you could pay them very, very, very little, and you didn't have to provide for their food or clothing. So there was an unsavory side to this, in that it was just simply, in many cases, it was cheaper to use women, children, and immigrant labor than it would have been to even own slaves as a factory owner in the first place, as weird as that sounds. But that was the case. So this leads into the tariff issue. So as American factories lagged several years behind their competitors in Great Britain, Britain could produce goods at a much cheaper price. This caused a controversy, of course, because many American factories, not wanting to be driven out of business by the British, sent their legislators, their congressmen, to try and get tariffs adopted. Tariff, as you know, is a protective tax that protects native industry by making imports more expensive. And this was opposed by the South for two reasons. One was the fear, spelt, in this case, exactly how you'd expect a Southerner to pronounce it, as the fear of reprisal tariffs, a.k.a. the fear that if we started putting taxes on goods that we're importing from Britain, Britain would turn around and put tariffs on cotton, indigo, rice, and tobacco it imported from the South. The other fear is that this would increase the cost of manufactured goods, as they would now have to buy the northern ones, which were cheaper than the British ones used to be.